before stone pyramids pierced the sky, before columns rose in honor of gods, before scripture, before myth, before memory itself, there were caves, not carved by hands, but by time, not lit by fire, but by inner vision. And though their walls were rough and cold, they were the first temples, not because humans built them, but because humans felt something within them awaken. Imagine this. A flickering torch descends into the breathless dark. A hush falls. The sound of wind disappears. And in that void, something ancient stirs not outside, but within. The earliest humans did not choose caves for shelter alone. They came to commune, to offer, to remember something older than words, something buried in bone and dream. Deep within those stone chambers, they painted, hands pressed against the walls, animals dancing in ochre and ash, circles, spirals, stars, symbols etched not for art, but for ritual, not to decorate, but to invoke. They entered the cave not to escape the world, but to enter another one. To crawl through the narrow passage into darkness was to pass through the birth canal of the earth, a symbolic return to the womb, a death and a rebirth. This is no coincidence. Across continents and millennia, the same pattern emerges. Humans seeking the divine not above, but below, not in sunlight, but in silence, not in temples of marble, but in caverns of stone. There is a reason why even today we call sacred places sanctuaries. The word itself echoes the shape of a womb, enclosed, protected, fertile, hidden. Caves were the first places where the sacred and the human met, not in the language of theology, but in breath, shadow, and echo. The earth was alive, and her breath moved through the rock. Some scholars see primitive fear, but the soul recognizes something deeper. These early seekers knew that to go down was to go in, that the darkness was not the absence of light, but the presence of something deeper than light, the source. And so they bowed their heads, crawled through stone, and entered not just a cave, but the beginning of the sacred. To enter the cave is to return to the beginning, not just of history, but of life itself. Across ancient cultures, the cave was more than a hollow in the earth. It was the womb of the mother, not metaphorically, but cosmologically, ritually, spiritually. It was the place from which all things emerged, and to which all things must return. Long before the sky gods of thunder and fire, there was the Mother Earth. She had many names: Gaia, Danu, Pachamama, Ki, Isis. But beneath every culture, her shape was the same: round, fertile, enclosing. She was not worshipped in temples of gold, but in the body of the earth herself. And the cave? It was her heart, her center, her breath. To the ancients, this was not symbolism, it was reality. The earth lived, she pulsed, she dreamed. And just as the womb holds and transforms, so too did the cave conceal, gestate, and initiate. Within its dark stone belly, rituals of fertility and death were performed, not to worship death, but to understand rebirth. To be swallowed by the earth was not to vanish, but to return to the primordial source of being. The feminine principle is not soft, it is deep. It is the force that gestates stars in silence, the pull that draws seed to soil and soul to silence. In myth, goddesses often dwell in the mountain or beneath the ground. They are not above, but within. And when heroes descend, it is not to conquer, but to be transformed in her presence. The cave becomes the cosmic matrix, the dark, fertile void, where life, death, and time dissolve, where ego fades, and only essence remain. It is the place where words cannot follow, where only symbols, sound, and breath can speak. Even in the male-dominated pantheons that followed, the image of the cave womb remained, hidden but unforgotten in grottos of the Virgin, in the tomb of Christ, in the underground shrines and sacred springs of saints and sibyls, because something in us still remembers that the path to the divine begins with returning to the Mother. And the Mother is not above us. She is beneath, in the dark, in the depth, in the womb of the earth, waiting not with judgment, but with invitation. No true awakening comes without descent. Before one can rise, one must fall. Before the crown opens, the roots must go deep into darkness. The cave was never merely a shelter, it was a trial, a gate, a threshold between worlds. To enter it was not a simple act of stepping inside, it was to pass through a ritual of unmaking. Across ancient mythologies, descent is a sacred theme. Inanna, queen of heaven, descends into the underworld stripped of her power, her symbols, her name. Only when she is nothing can she rise again. Isis goes underground to gather the pieces of Osiris. Persephone is taken to the shadow realm, and her return marks the rebirth of the earth itself. These are not just stories, they are maps. They show the path the soul must take to be reborn. First down, then through, then up. In ancient mystery schools, the initiate would descend into the cave as part of a sacred rite, symbolic death, blindfolded, alone, led through winding tunnels into darkness, where breath slows and the senses turn inward. Why? Because in the dark, the ego loses its grip. The false self cannot survive without light, and in that quiet unraveling, the soul emerges. The descent is not punishment, it is preparation. The cave becomes the tomb and the womb. The initiate dies not in body, but in identity. What emerges is not the same being who entered. Something deeper awakens, something that remembers. Modern minds fear the dark, but the ancients knew the dark is where truth lives. In the belly of the earth, far from distraction, there is only breath, stone, pulse, and the whisper of the sacred. To descend is to say, I am ready to forget what I thought I was, so I may remember what I truly am. And when the initiate emerges covered in dust, marked by silence, they do not speak of what they saw. Because what is found in the cave cannot be spoken, only carried, only lived. Stone does not speak in words, but in certain places, it sings. Within the deepest caves of the ancient world, sound was not an accident, it was the key, a secret language etched not in symbols but in vibration. In caves across France, Spain, Turkey, and beyond, researchers have uncovered a curious pattern. The places where Paleolithic humans painted their symbols, handprints, animals, spirals are often the most acoustically resonant spots in the entire cave. This is no coincidence. It is design. Ancient people did not choose these walls because they looked beautiful. They chose them because they resonated. Because when you chanted, clapped, or drummed, the walls responded. The cave became alive. In these spaces, the human voice doesn't simply echo, it transforms. A single note lingers, expands, fills the chamber like a presence. Low frequencies vibrate through the bones. Rhythms disorient time. Silence folds in on itself. This is not just sound, it is ritual technology. Drumming in these spaces could induce trance. Chanting could awaken visions. The cave became a resonance chamber tuned to the soul, amplifying intention, revealing what the ordinary mind cannot see. Long before cathedrals learned the science of echo, long before Tibetan monks discovered overtone harmonics, the earth itself had already offered the original blueprint. Sound in the cave is not entertainment. It is entrance into altered states, into non-ordinary realities, into communion with something vast and unseen. And the structure of the cave, its curves, its depths, its hollows, all act like a sacred instrument. The seeker does not simply chant within it, they become the chant. Modern scientists now call these places acoustic hotspots, but the ancients called them something simpler, sacred. Because what is more sacred than a place that can sing back to you, where the earth itself responds to your voice, not with words, but with vibration. And in that resonance, something happens. The mind dissolves, the self expands, and suddenly you remember. You are not just making sound, You are sound. You are frequency. You are part of the ancient music still echoing in the bones of the earth. Before the first written word, there was the mark, a handprint, a spiral, a line carved deep into cold stone. It is tempting to call it primitive art, but to the soul that listens, it becomes something else entirely, a language, not of grammar but of presence, not made to explain but to transmit. The cave walls of Lascaux, Chauvet, Altamira, and beyond hold more than images. They hold intention, a silent communication passed from spirit to stone and stone to seeker. The red handprint is not decoration. It is a signature of the eternal witness, a soul saying, I was here not just in body, but in mystery. The spirals, dots, grids, and zigzags appear again and again, not just in one cave, but in caves across continents. These are not random scribbles. They are codes, archetypal symbols etched in the dark long before alphabets would bind meaning in letters. Many of these marks are found deep inside cave systems, in areas with no light, no airflow, places that require deliberate descent. Why go to such effort? Why mark the walls of the Earth's womb with symbols that no one would casually find? Because they weren't meant to be seen, they were meant to be felt. Modern researchers offer theories, hunting magic, storytelling, early counting systems. But the truth may be both simpler and deeper. These were sacred records. Not records of events, but of states of being. The animal dances across the wall not to illustrate a story, but to mirror the primal force of the wild. The spiral does not describe motion, it is motion, encoded. These symbols are not about the outer world. They are mirrors of the inner journey. Some believe they were created during altered states, vision quests, deep meditation, shamanic trance. The cave was not just a canvas, it was a portal, and the symbols were footprints of the soul's passage. To trace your hand along these ancient etchings is to enter into a dialogue across tens of thousands of years. A conversation in silence, because the earth remembers, stone remembers, and those symbols still pulse with meaning, if not to the eye, then to the spirit. We do not need to translate them. We need to feel them, to sit with them in the dark, and let their presence awaken something sleeping in us. Because perhaps they do not speak to the mind, but to the part of us that was never separate from the cave. When the divine speaks, it rarely does so from a throne. It whispers from the dark, from stone, from below. Across the world's great traditions, the cave is more than a shelter. It is a holy place, a space of visions, silence, surrender. Prophets, mystics, saints, and seekers all found their revelations not in palaces, but in the earth's hidden chambers. The Buddha sat beneath a tree, but before that, he wandered through forests and caves. In one story, it was in a cave where he began to perceive the nature of illusion, where stillness cracked open the veil of the self. Muhammad, peace be upon him, received his first revelation in the cave of Hira, a small, lonely space in the mountains, where silence reigned and the heart could be heard. Zarathustra meditated in a cave for years before receiving the sacred fire. Lao Tzu, Shiva yogis, Christian hermits, Sufi dervishes all retreated into caverns to seek the voice that does not speak in language. Why the cave? Because in the cave there are no distractions, no sun, no spectacle, only breath, stone, and the slow turning of time. The earth becomes your only companion, and in her silence, something awakens. Myth mirrors this truth. The cave is the entrance to the underworld in nearly every tradition, but not as punishment, as transformation. In Greek myth, Orpheus descends into the cave to retrieve his beloved. In Vedic stories, sages retreat to Himalayan caves to meditate for centuries. In Celtic lore, the hollow hills hold the otherworld, the land of spirits, wisdom, and timelessness. Even in Christianity, Christ is born in a grotto, and later buried and resurrected in a tomb carved into rock. The pattern is clear. Birth, death, rebirth all happen in the cave. It is the place of endings and beginnings, the place where heaven touches the bones of the earth. and those who enter it do not return the same. Because in the stillness of stone, beneath layers of noise and thought, something ancient waits. Not a god, not a vision, but a truth too vast for words. And it speaks not through thunder, but through the silence that lives in the heart of the cave. Not all temples reached toward the sky. Some went deep into rock, into silence, into the living earth. To modern minds, caves are empty voids. But to the ancients, they were engines, places of energy, alignment, and activation. Across the world, we find evidence not just of natural caves, but of man-made subterranean temples, complex, deliberate, and precise. In Malta, the hypogeum of Al-Saflieni winds 3 levels underground. Its chambers are tuned to specific frequencies, especially 111 Hz, which induce altered states of consciousness. A whispered word becomes a chorus. A drumbeat becomes a cosmic pulse. This was not coincidence. It was design. In Cappadocia, vast underground cities were carved into volcanic rock not just to hide, but to live, pray, and gather in silence. Labyrinthine passages spiral downward, layer after layer, as if echoing the descent of the soul. The Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece also included descents into underground halls, where initiates were shown visions they never spoke of again. Plato hinted that these rites were not mere symbols, but confrontations with reality itself. And in the Americas, Kiva's circular subterranean chambers were built by the ancestral Puebloans. They mimicked the womb, the underworld, the place of emergence. Fire in the center, sky above, earth all around. Why this obsession with going down? Because the ancients knew that transformation requires pressure, depth, containment, and the earth provides all 3. They also understood something we are only now rediscovering, that the earth emits frequencies, that her stone holds memory, that certain materials, shapes, and locations can amplify consciousness. These temples were not superstitions. They were technologies built not with wires, but with resonance, geometry, and deep intuition. They were sacred not because of belief, but because of function. And though many have been buried, forgotten, erased, the science behind them remains, hidden in stone and coded in myth, waiting not to be worshipped, but to be reawakened. Because perhaps the greatest secret of the ancient world is this: they didn't just worship the earth, they knew how to speak to her. And she answered in silence, in vibration, in the echo that still lives beneath our feet. The caves were never just in the earth, they were in us. Long before we dug into stone, we were already descending into memory, into shadow, into the silence beneath our thoughts. The final cave is not a place, it is a state. It is the still, quiet space behind the noise of the world and the stories we tell ourselves. In ancient times, the descent was physical. Now, it is inward. We no longer crawl through tunnels of rock, but through tunnels of the mind, layers of identity, fear, illusion. The cave becomes meditation. The silence becomes ritual. The breath becomes torchlight guiding us through the dark. In a world obsessed with light, we forget that growth happens in darkness. Seeds sprout underground. Wombs are dark. Caves are dark. And so is the soul, until it learns to see without eyes. To return to the inner earth is to reject the superficial and embrace the sacred unseen. It is to step away from constant input and return to the echo, that ancient voice that does not speak in language, but in feeling. The modern seeker has no need for cathedrals. The body is a temple, the breath is a prayer, and the heart is a cave still pulsing with the first silence. To go within is to descend into a place untouched by time. There, we find no gods, no doctrines, only truth. Raw, wordless, alive. The mystery was never lost. It was buried. Not in ruins, but beneath our distractions. not in history, but in the unvisited chambers of the soul. And now the earth calls us back, not to worship her, but to remember her, and through her, to remember ourselves. So, return to stillness, to shadow, to stone. And listen, the cave is still there, and it has been waiting for you.